Happy Friday and welcome to Screen Junkies Universe. And it is a very happy Friday indeed because I not only have Mr. Dan Murrell and Mr. Spencer Gilbert, but we are so fortunate to be joined today by Julia and Eric Lewald, who are the showrunners. We're the showrunners on X-Men the Animated Series. And we're going to be able to talk to them about their book, which you can see right here, Previously on X-Men, the making of an animated series. We have some fan questions for you. Yeah, we'll just put it all over the desk.
I'll put it behind it.
Double time it.
You got a million of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like when you
We're so excited to talk to you guys about that. We have some fan questions for you guys as well. We're going to dig in really quickly to our first story, which is an industry story that I love your feedback on. I'm really looking forward to this. There was an article released yesterday on The Wrap, which I encourage you guys to go read because it's a pretty fascinating read about why Warner Brothers did not delay the release of Justice League. And so I'll walk us through the steps as quickly as I can, then love to hear your thoughts. So they've talked about sort of the initial creative freedom that former Warner Brothers president Greg Silverman gave Zack Snyder on Man of Steel after the success of the Nolan series, the Nolan Batman trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, which, great, right? You gave him creative freedom, it was well received, people loved it, that's gonna work again. Now, when Man of Steel got a more mixed response, there started to be a divide. This is coming from insiders, who we don't know who they are, inside of Warner Brothers. Started to be sort of a divide between how much freedom should Zack Snyder really be getting, what should sort of the tone of this be, the dark tone of the Dark Knight trilogy worked for Batman, doesn't work so much for Superman, people felt. So there was some push-pull inside the studio about that. That escalated and escalated throughout the process through Justice League in terms of light versus dark tone. Then, of course, Joss Whedon came in to help out on the script, and he has a very different aesthetic than Zack Snyder. And then personal tragedy struck the Snyder family, which is just beyond sad, and he eventually left the project. Joss Whedon took over. At this point, some people felt like maybe the release date ought to be pushed back because they were doing additional shooting. They had to really address the tone and make it a cohesive film. But for a number of reasons, they did not. I mean, one of the things that people point out, too, is that Henry Cavill had to come back for reshoots. He was on loan from Mission Impossible. Paramount would not let him shave his mustache. I know you guys have seen this meme.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because their effects were rushed, some people felt that it looked a little... Dan, what would you say?
As I said on the show, Superman had a baby mouth.
Baby mouth. Baby mouth. Looked a little weird. Many people felt it looked a little weird. So, but here's where it gets interesting. One of the primary reasons, according to this article, that they did not delay the release is due to a potential merger. So there was a potential merger between Warner Brothers and AT&T, so they're assessing each other's assets, and they did not want to project weakness by delaying the film. In addition, they wanted to preserve their bonuses, because if they had delayed it, they may not have been there to receive them once the merger, if and when the merger does go through. So again, this is a far denser article. I'm just hitting sort of the key elements here. And what I want to talk to you guys about is from your experience, the balance that you have seen between business decisions that will impact creative, and specifically, I want to get your take on the Warner Brothers story as well, but particularly with things like comic book characters, because there's the element of they also have to sell toys, which could really impact creative.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we've had that happen a lot. I mean, we've worked on 36 different animated shows, and almost all of them have had a toy factor. And in fact, there was, and part of the problem is there's not a lot of money in the broadcasting of TV shows, which is an odd thing to think of right now. So if you want to sell a show, you need to show the people that are putting up the $5 million or whatever it is for your season, oh, but you'll make it up in merchandise. So that's a real tense thing, because when you're on the creative side, you just say, well, and sometimes you get very understanding business people and merchandising people that just say, make the best show you can. If people love it, they'll buy our stuff. But that's 1 out of 10. Most of the time, the people that are making the merchandise, at least on the TV level, want to have a say in product placement or the design of the show or the nature of the stories or how the characters interact. And we were really lucky on X-Men, because when we did X-Men, it was at the bottom. You know, Marvel was really nearing bankruptcy. They didn't have a toy deal in place for X-Men. So when we did the show, we were 12 episodes in writing the script, and finally a toy guy called up and said, "Can you put, you know, the Batman?"
That would have been amazing.
That would have been
just a whole different show.
Can you put the Wolverine walkie-talkie in, please? And we said, no, we can't do that. And no, we'll leave the show if you make us do it. And by that, it was just too far along. And so by the time the show hit, even if the toy people might have had some leverage for the next season, they weren't going to argue with success. And so we were lucky that they were having such a hard time at Marvel when we started our show.
Yeah, when you put it that way. But no, truly, so much of this is driven by powers way beyond whatever the creative has a chance to kind of get their head around. So I'm not surprised to hear what you're telling us or what we're reading. It's sort of a sad reality.
For me, yeah, the business aspect is what fascinated me, because like the push and pull between Zack Snyder and Joss, it's kind of, that to me seems reactive to, like, it's that saying of, like, you know, failure's an orphan and success has many fathers. To me, that's just like, you know, so like, well, it wasn't me, it was Snyder, it wasn't Whedon. He's like, but to me, the business aspect, because if you, as an outsider looking in, if you look at this project and the combination of things, the idea of a studio that wants to decide on a tone is a major thing, and then a personal tragedy, obviously, where you're shuffling who's in charge, what they're doing, in addition to the reshoots that you're already doing, you would think just logically that, hey, let's take 6 months or 8 months or whatever, and let's really do it. But this idea of, well, AT&T's buying us, if we do this, it looks like we're in disarray. It's like this whole other thing that has nothing to do with fandom. It has nothing to do with creativity. It has nothing to, it's completely corporate. It's a purely business decision. And I feel like a lot of times on the show, you know, we jokingly call it movie broccoli when we talk about things like this. But I mean, this is how things like happen. Corporate mergers and acquisitions and like all these things that seem kind of boring, this is the results of that and how it trickles down to affecting, you know, how does it affect you as a moviegoer? This is how, you know, we're now looking at the potential that because of a boardroom move, there was, you know, potentially a chance that we got a movie that wasn't where, I mean, the article says numerous times that there are people at the studio that nobody was really happy with it. It didn't conform to anybody's wants or desires, but you had a date and it had to go out, because if it didn't, then this merger's in trouble, because then it's a whole thing. And
well, I almost think that wanting to keep their bonuses is a more convincing reason for me to be worried about like projecting weakness. I mean, maybe I'm ascribing too much humanity to a corporate person, but like if somebody steps down from a personal tragedy, it's understandable to delay the movie. That's not projecting weakness. This isn't like if you see a bear in the woods. The wanting to make many millions of dollars at the end of the year makes, on a personal level, makes more sense to me.
But in retrospect, the bigger sign of weakness, though, now is you have a movie that is going to struggle to break even.
That's why I think it's like the personal greed aspect.
That's worse. Yeah, that's worse than delaying the movie, because now instead of an image of weakness, you now have an actual financial indicator that says this franchise is not as strong as we wanted it to be, and so it's a self-defeating thing. You know?
And you have basically, to your point, Dan, you have a situation where in the press, in the film, it looks like a studio in disarray. I mean, the read that you get creatively is that there's a split in how, in a lot of these films, that there's a split in how they want the film to play, because it doesn't necessarily, this one I think less than some others actually, but it doesn't necessarily read as a cohesive whole. I think Justice League does more than some other films have.
Justice League to me was felt way more cohesive than, say, Suicide Squad.
Right, exactly.
Just from the same studio. I'm not picking on DC in particular, but like Justice League to me felt like a much more cohesive whole than Suicide Squad.
Yeah,
but the tonal thing for me was what was obvious was this was obviously from this part, this was from this part, and it you know, did it mesh together perfectly for me? No, but it did feel a little more cohesive. That's the other weird thing, is like this is the one that's kind of coming to a head when this felt way more put together than some of the other ones that have come earlier.
Sure, and I wonder, and again, coming from your perspective, in terms of if not just projecting strong leadership, but having strong leadership seems like a key, both creatively and from the perspective of the executives, because if there is such a divide, then it's going to come out in the press, and that's going to look pretty weak.
The train has left the station even before key people are put in place, typically on any kind of project. You know, someone with funding, someone with an idea, someone who can put it where it needs to be put. That's already rolling. And then the addition of the various layers of folks who come in, that just gets things going faster. So a challenge in a situation like this with all the variables just means that I don't know if I see how they could have delayed the release date and not encountered all kinds of financial penalties for not hitting it through various studios or not hitting various theaters in time. But once this big thing gets rolling, it's going to keep rolling.
Yeah, and the people that see the overview of Warner Brothers for the next 10 years, they see it in terms of, well, if we delay 6 months, will we have a marginally better movie? Will we take what may now be a really bad movie and make it a really good movie, or will it be something small? Balance that against maybe $200 million of losses and again, maybe losing people like the mustache. Contracts are so convoluted that then when you need a special favor, you often it's hard to get. And as I say, we were on the flip side, we were so lucky on the X-Men TV show is that the executives that had leverage at Fox, and it was Fox's TV's show, it wasn't Marvel's show, it wasn't Saban's show, it wasn't anybody else's show. It was their show. They were putting up the majority of the money. They were in sync with us creatively. In fact, they hired the three main creative people because they thought the three of us best fit their vision for the show. So there was no all the people that wanted to change it and come in with stuff that would have turned it upside down had to fight through the president of the television network and her assistant before they got to me. So it was great. We were supported.
This is kind of fascinating, not just to get your take, which is true. That must be quite the equation, right? Are we going to get 5% better on this movie? Is that worse? The 90% loss financially that we'll take, that is probably, that must be a really difficult decision to make. But you're telling me the story also of how it can work well. Which is pretty exciting.
Not most of the time. most of the time they're fights and compromises and things that don't work out as well as you hope they would. But once in a while, everybody's rowing, the same together. And it happened that once for us.
Well, I want to get to the questions that our fans have for you about the book and about the series, but I just want to address something that Spencer said really quickly first. If you see a bear in the woods, you should absolutely be afraid. And there are different responses.
Don't project weakness.
No, there are different bears. If you go after a brown bear, there's some bears.
If it's brown, lie down. If it's black, fight back.
Exactly. So if it's a black bear, don't project weakness.
No, do. Wait, yes.
If it's a black bear,
fight back.
Fight back. You should
make yourself big,
really big. But if it's a brown bear, lie down and play dead because it's probably going to kill you. Don't roll into a ball because they'll think that's really a fun thing to unravel.
Bear authority. It's great.
No, that's helpful.
We're not liable for any bear-related injuries we may suffer.
We dodged the bullet with this bear stuff yesterday, and we're bringing it back. We yesterday we're talking about bears and raincoats, and I thought that we'd settled this.
Also, I want to print a retraction from yesterday's show. Paddington likes marmalade sandwiches. It's marmalade, not honey.
You're going to hear from the fans.
Yeah, I did hear from some people. I do love the movie, though. Glad we cleared all that up with you guys here to witness. I want to talk about the book, but first, let's talk about the fact that your Prime Minister, who
we're not Canadian.
We are not Canadian. We are American. citizens.
I'm
We
so
are.
sorry.
No.
I jumped to an inaccurate conclusion because I had pictures of the Prime Minister receiving your book. I just assumed you were Canadian.
We just love him.
The entire cast of X-Men was Canadian, and that's how we got in touch with him.
Okay, so I jumped to an inaccurate conclusion, and I'll print a retraction. As Americans who love Canadians,
Yes. That's
because we had talked about him so much before and how much we love him.
Yes, exactly. Who couldn't? Who
wouldn't? Right?
Foolish. not
I'm
to.
also not
women
Canadian,
Yeah,
and I
right.
feel the same way.
Exactly. Yeah.
What a dreamboat.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt.
I mean, anyway, the Prime Minister of Canada got your book from Wolverine and Jubilee. Let's take a look. How did that? So they were the ones that.
Well, when Eric finished the book, and we were just, it turns out there are a lot of X-Men fans out there in the world, and you don't.
Every corner of the world.
And word kind of came around that Justin, because we'd seen pictures of him on the set for X-Men Dark Phoenix that's filming up there now, and we're aware that he is into this kind of.
He's a fanboy. He's a real geek.
So wouldn't that be funny if we
Is
could reach
he
out to-
really?
Yes. Yeah. 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 The love grows deeper, doesn't it? The love grows deeper.
Were you able to go?
So story is I'm getting the books together because we finally got them. We're all very excited, and I promised one to everybody that worked on the book in any fashion. So there are 36 people interviewed, 11 of whom were cast members, and so I'm packing them up to send them to Canada. And I laughingly in the email, when I told the whole cast that they were coming up, said, I hear Justin Trudeau's a bit of a nerd boy, so if any of you is a drinking buddy with him, I'll send up an extra book and you can give it to him. And I got a note back from Jubilee an hour later saying, yeah, I know somebody on his staff. Come on, get me a book.
So then I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll go up in January. We'll make a
Julia's
major
thinking,
presentation.
Julia's
I'll hand it
thinking
to him.
the Prime Minister will take out a day to hang with us, which is not at all what
girl can
happened.
dream. Yeah.
But I sent Jubilee up a book, and she and Wolverine, who live on the same street, went to his office and had a photo op and gave him a book, which I said, for Justin.
That's also such a Jubilee plot line. It's like, while the X-Men are off saving the world, she has to get the Prime Minister a copy.
Yeah, perfect. Life imitating art.
There you go. Yeah.
Did we? I wasn't even paying attention because I was so taken. But did we show the images?
We saw.
Good. Perfect.
You want to just look for Justin again?
Yeah,
He is dreaming.
I didn't know this information. This is new information for me. Also, you guys are so pleasant and lovely that I just immediately assumed you were Canadian.
Yeah, Canadian nice.
Sorry.
I do remember when I was a kid, though, there were a lot of oats and like watching X-Men. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, Wolverine, it makes sense.
Wolverine.
Sure.
There you go. There you go.
Let's go to some fan questions, and we can each take one. Spencer, do you want to go and start with David Anderson? Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson asks, if you could make a standalone live-action remake of one storyline from the animated series, what would you pick? And would you recast the roles? I assume from the original X-Men trilogy, because not everyone's cast yet in the new ones.
Okay, we recast.
What storyline would you pick to make a live-action?
Okay, from
your.
I've got one.
Okay. Well, all right. Just the challenge is, I think one of the things the series had the advantage of was being able to tell things over a period of time. And I think one of the challenges the movies have faced is trying to tell a multi-part story in a very short period of time. So that's an interesting question. What did you come up with?
My favorite episode that we did was One Man's Worth, just because of the nature of the story about valuing Xavier as much as it did. But I think in terms of thinking of a full movie, I think the best written, or the longest, the 5-parter we did of the Phoenix Saga was, I thought, the best sustained writing of the series. And my two buddies, Mark and Michael Edens, wrote the whole thing with me, and that was the most cohesive and satisfying. And it's such a strong story to start with from the books. So we would, 20 years from now, after people forgotten the first, we would put that one on. I think would be would be my choice.
Is that 22 minutes times 5?
Yeah, so it's 100.
That's a
It's
good
100. It's 110 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that'll work.
Do you guys want to make a movie or?
Do we want to?
We
Yeah,
will.
because I can make that happen.
Oh, well, we come to the right place.
Talking to Roth Greenlight Cornet.
First the
You
Prime
get a
Minister,
green light
now
and you
Roth.
get a green light.
One thing I'll say that I'm sort of sorry the ball got dropped on is I think Warner Brothers has done a tremendous job with the animated DVD movies that they've made and have kept that going for quite a while now and have turned out crazy quality product. That never happened on the Marvel side of the equation, and that would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
who
for
knows,
us-
maybe it could happen still.
Yeah, for the X-Men stuff, just the rights were so complicated that
Yeah.
no one was ever in a position to ask for one to be made. But yeah, longer stories are fun.
Dan?
I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's so many good ones.
Okay, great.
Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Lane asks, if X-Men the Animated Series could have added one more X-Men series regular to the team,
Oh, okay.
who would it have been and why?
Okay.
So I guess somebody that was not a regular that you would have.
Okay. Go ahead, Julia.
With the hindsight now of the sort of the more vocal fan base, a lot of people have brought up the idea of Psylocke joining the team. One of the challenges is figuring out, okay, who do you want just because you love the character versus what would that person bring to the storytelling? You don't necessarily, I would love Bishop to be a part of it, or Cable, but you've got 3 guys who are really big and powerful if you include Wolverine, even though he's short. But you kind of want people to have complementary powers, so they each bring their own thing to it. But Psylocke could have been a fun choice.
Yeah, I think Nightcrawler, because he ended up being part of the team in some of the books, and he is so different from the rest of the team that I think he would fit in without stepping on anybody's toes. And he's a sweet character.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer, you want to grab the next one from Billy?
Yeah, Billy Paul Han. What's up, Billy? Asks, if you were to change one thing through the series, what would it have been and why?
Money. would have been just a little more money.
Money and time.
A little more breathing room. Yeah, in terms of what pressures the show was under from the very beginning. I mean, still, it got done. It got made. We're happy, but it would have been nice to have a little more opportunity to.
Yeah, not money for higher salaries, although we'll take it.
We would have taken it.
But to be able to, there's things that we would just look at our friends that were working on Batman and see, oh, well, you sent that back the 5th or 6th time to the studio to get retakes so it's slightly better and slightly better. And we get stuff back the day before it had to show, and it was, well, no retakes on this episode. Sorry, pal. It was a fast, low-budget show. There are good parts to that, in that we just cranked and focused, and the people that the wonderful art people that were producing it and cutting it had it in their mind that we don't have time to sit around because we won't be getting beautiful stuff back from our studio. We have to make it really kick-ass so that people will be focusing on the story and the drama and the pace rather than, oh, gee, he's a little he doesn't quite look like he's supposed to look this week, or in that frame, or they're not moving quite the way we want them to move. Boy, talk to Larry Houston, get him in here and ask him when he got footage back. We thought it was going to move like that, but now I'm going to have to cut this scene a little bit differently. So there wasn't a lot of time to fix and read. I mean, in animated features, they redo the movie 11 times. I mean, it takes them 4 years to do the thing that we did with the Phoenix Saga in a few months. And one of the things they do is every single 30th of a second is made pristine. And with us, it's just like, write it, draw it, throw it at the audience. And I say there's a certain joy and freedom to that, and it keeps you from having to get a lot of notes and having people read. Maybe we could tell a different Phoenix Saga. We could turn that all upside down, which is very frustrating for writers. So
Does it need to be Jean Grey?
So from the writer's point of view, going fast was wonderful. It was like adrenaline. But I think from a fan's point of view, if we'd have time to rethink a couple of the weaker stories, that would have been great, and we would have had the opportunity. But yeah, that's time and budget would have been helpful.
Yeah.
This one I would love your take on. And Curious George asks, do you believe in superhero fatigue in terms of the media?
My point to that issue, and we've talked about this recently, going back to the beginning of filmed entertainment, you've got your genres, and we had westerns, we had musicals, and film noir. You can speak to a specific genre of film, and if you look back at it, it wasn't until within the last 20 years you actually even had the superhero genre in the films. You had Superman, you had Batman, but those did not. Those were standalones.
A couple times a decade, you'd get a superhero movie, and then 3 or 4 times a decade, you get a superhero TV show that kind of came and went. But it was basically a one-off each time, and now suddenly there's this flood. Whereas she said, it's like there used to be 37 Western TV shows on at once, and back 60 years ago, and people were used to that, and they got used to the different nuances and the different kinds of Westerns there were, and it allowed them to evolve and become better and better. And I think some of the greatest ones were made in the late 60s and early 70s as the thing was dying. I would like to think the same thing would happen with superheroes, that with this glut, that people start taking chances. And like what Guardians was so different from the superheroes shows before that, then maybe there's a dozen other ways, tangents you can take, like Guardians took, that'll be surprising, and they'll still be superhero shows, but it'll be not what you're used to, not doing the same one over and over and over again.
That's the hope.
Yeah,
As fans too.
this is one because I know that Ninja Turtles had some of these kind of same issues. Jack Mannheim asked, what were the stipulations for Wolverine using his claws? I assume Fox Kids would have made that difficult. However, the sparing use made his darkroom demolition of multiple Sentinels all the more glorious. Was there? Because I know, especially in the '90s with cartoons, violence was a big to do, and that is. I mean, he's got basically knives on his hands,
and that's how he fights. That's what it's.
And we made a lot of creative decisions about that. I mean, there have been congressional hearings and organizations railing about this since the '60s, and it's a real issue because people think of television as something that comes into their home and that is a community owned, and so parents get very upset when they think that something is endangering their children, and we get that, and we signed up. We knew what we signed up for when we were doing children's television. At the same time, networks want to put on stuff that's exciting, and exciting tends to mean conflict-filled and violent. And if you want to do anything with, in the '90s there were very, very strict rules, which we bent as far as we could with Wolverine. But as an example, we chose Will Mineo, who was the head guy on the show for the first year. He helped me decide that we had to have the Sentinels as the first adversary, and he said, reason one, we can blow them up and Wolverine can rip them apart, and we can't do that with any human adversary. We're cartoons, we want the action, they'll let us do this, they won't, because we got a stern note back from Marvel that said, wait a minute, what's all this stuff with the Sentinels? Magneto's our big guy, you have to rethink all this. And Will gently held their hand and said, you don't make TV shows, we do, you don't understand. The Sentinels are the perfect adversary for our first year on TV, and that was one of the reasons.
Cool. A question from Papa Culture. What are some of the difficulties you faced incorporating the more controversial storylines? He compliments you. It's a groundbreaking exploration of prejudices and such compelling character development for a cartoon.
Well, going back to Nightcrawler, just even introducing the idea,
saying the word God,
the introduction of the idea of a discussion of religion in a children's half-hour Saturday morning cartoon was one of those, I can't believe this is going to get cleared, but it was handled so carefully and I think so legitimately, and I haven't seen it done like that since. But that was part of what the show was allowing us to do, was to look at those kinds of questions and go, maybe this can be told this way.
And we were really lucky. Writers out here in Hollywood want to talk about really serious things in kids' shows, and 95 out of 100 times they're not allowed to. It's just an executive decision. And when we were hired by Fox, Margaret Lesh and Sidney Iwander said, we want you to push the envelope. You know, X-Men is about as intense and adult and a comic as is out there, and we want you to be faithful to it. And then the third of the person that was important to allow us to do this, because again, lots of people can write stories like this, they're just not usually allowed to. A wonderful lady named Avery Coburn was our broadcast standards and practices person. And she has absolute power. If she had wanted to decide that Wolverine could never be mad at anybody, she could have just written that in a note and it would have been the end of it for 76 episodes.
Yeah.
Forget about punching, forget about scratching, forget about, I remember later a much worse executive looking to me and said, why were those X-Men always angry at each other so much? Why couldn't they all get along and be friends? So there are people like that in positions of power that have veto power over every moment of your TV show. And she was wonderful. She started in, she's very literate and she liked the books, and so she knew where it was coming from. And B, she had started in primetime broadcast standards, and so she was coming down from The Simpsons to us, and her instincts were more sophisticated and more adult, and she let us get away with focusing on, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King having idealistic arguments about the nature of humanity. Mm-hmm. So that it was all good executives above us that led us to it.
Cool. That answers Stephen's question, which was about Nightcrawler. So we'll go to Cole, who asks, what tips would you give those creating the Dark Phoenix saga movie?
My goodness.
Boy, that's a tough one. In remembering adapting it, my memory of the challenge was that the books, there might be 15 books that it covered, had all sorts of subplots, and Chris Claremont, who's astounding, loved layering 5 or 6 different things going on at once that would resolve at various places along the line of the books. And for writing a single story, which we thought of our Dark Phoenix as being, my major job was paring away the subplots that didn't really fit and didn't really focus on our core characters. And what I think that did for me was make it more about, put Cyclops more front and center, because all this stuff is happening through the woman he loves. And so make him much larger part of the story, because he's watching her go through this and it's affecting him more than anybody. And that was making it more about the team's reaction to Jean, rather than some of the secondary villains and secondary crises that were in the books. Helped me get it set up.
Yeah, I'm going to go off script here, because you mentioned Cyclops with Dark Phoenix, because we talked about this just because we're Screen Junkies. But this idea that, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking about before, which is outside influences affecting the creative direction of a movie, which is with The Last Stand, when they did do the Dark Phoenix, James Marsden, who was Cyclops, went over to do Superman Returns with Bryan Singer, which means that he's not in the movie now, and he's basically in 5 minutes of the movie and he's gone. And I've always thought that for me was a big reason why that movie didn't work quite as well, because the Jean Grey Dark Phoenix story is so much tied to Cyclops, and you have to kind of rotate it over to Wolverine, but you're losing the track of, like, if you, I don't even know, like, as a creative, like, I imagine the people that are writing that movie, I think Zach Penn might have done the screenplay for that, and Brett Ratner directed it, but when you have something like that happens, where all of a sudden they're like, oh, by the way, you don't have Cyclops. Like, how do you even begin to approach an issue like that? Like, but that's kind of at the core of the story, Yeah,
well,
the train's left the station. It's left the station. It's barreling ahead, and Cyclops isn't on it. So it's like, okay, now we got to just keep going, because there's going to be a stop day on this, and something's got to be out there. And
now you get the reverse, where it's like Jennifer Lawrence is the biggest star we have, so now she's the leader. Mystique is the leader of the X-Men. So make it work.
Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
Focusing, because, and that is something we luckily didn't have to deal with because there were no superstars involved in the series. We could just focus the stories on which characters fit the story best rather than who was hot. That was, believe
Because
me.
they were all hot.
Yeah, they were all hot.
Equally hot.
We know that we had a few more questions. We're sorry, you guys. We tried to get as many as we possibly could in here, but we don't want to take up too much of your time. However, before we do wrap up, I think you might have a little surprise for Spencer.
We have a surprise for Spencer.
Spencer.
Okay.
Da-la-la-la-la-la.
There was some discussion
Yes.
on the episode with the gift giving that you called things
First of all,
out.
thank you for watching our show.
That's incredibly flattering.
And you pointed out the genius that is the Nicolas Cage Reed poster. And we can't argue. We couldn't find it, though. I thought,
I
that would
couldn't
be
either.
great. Yeah. But so, in our own small way,
Homemade.
this is a little homemade to you, in keeping with what has happened this week for us with X-Men the Animated Series. I present to you now,
Justin Trudeau, read! Oh!
and Justin Trudeau is reading the X-Men the Animated Series book.
Man,
So there you go.
that is...
And I just wrote on the back of it so you can keep track of what it is.
That's amazing.
There you go.
Thank you guys so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Wow.
And we'll actually listen to him when he tells us to read. That's the amazing thing.
Because he's actually
Look, thank
doing
you.
it in the picture.
Oh, that's
He's
great.
doing
It's
it.
all her doing.
Like I said, I'm sorry it's not Nicolas Cage, but I'm happy that it's Justin Trudeau. So
Look, Eric and Julia, you're my inspiration for reading. Who cares about the Prime Minister? What has he ever done?
I care about you guys
Yes.
deeply. And I also care about the
you and I will go to Canada.
Let's go to Canada.
I think he needs another copy, is what I think. Yes.
ScreenJunkies Canada.
ScreenJunkies Vancouver,
Oh, wow,
let's do
there
it.
you go.
There you go.
Coming to you soon. We want you guys to read this book. Please tell everybody where they can find you, how they can get the book.
We are on Twitter a lot at X-Men TAS, which is for X-Men the Animated Series. We have a website, xmentas.com, where blogging and posting and all kinds of other stuff. Facebook, we have a new page previously on X-Men just for the title's sake. And then the book itself can be purchased through...
Two places. It's available Amazon everywhere around the world. And outside the U.S., it's soft cover only because it's so expensive to send 2-pound books various places. So they print them locally. If you're listening in New Zealand, they will print it up for you in New Zealand, and you'll have a copy for a reasonable price. So it's on Amazon, but the most fun place to buy it is at the website of the publisher, who is Jacobs Brown. Go to Jacobs Brown. They'll have hit the shop button, and they'll have hardback and softback. I don't even know if they have softbacks
Not
there
yet.
yet, but they'll have hardback editions. And the fun thing about them, I've signed all of those that they sell through the publisher's website.
So
which
if,
was
if
very
you get up there, yes.
doing 600 of them
I
was
know your
very-
animators felt.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you happen to buy the softcover book through Amazon in a foreign country, because the cost is crazy to ship, take a picture of yourself with the book and email us the file at our various addresses that you can find at xmentas.com, and Eric
Yeah,
will sign.
I'll sign the picture and
he'll send it back to you.
We'll email it back
So-
to you.
Awesome.
You can
That's
find all
amazing.
these links, by the way,
Yes,
in the description
in the
below.
description
So
below.
you can go down there and click. If they're not there now, they will
click.
be in a minute.
Yes.
Click right down here. Yeah.
Things. Click all of the things in the description below.
yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. It has been such a absolute wonderful pleasure. I can't believe you're not Canadian. You're so nice and so wonderful. I'm so excited to read the book. Thank you guys for sending in your questions. You guys, as always, Dan, Spencer, let's read.
Let's
all
read.
read together
Let's
this
read.
weekend.
Everybody.
Let's
Bye.
read.